What's up YouTube? Today I want to show you 5 tips to maximize your macros in Vital. So on a side note, these tips also work in the upcoming Phaseplan 2.0 release because of the whole remap thing that they've added. That being said, is a lot of the presets that I'm going to be showing you today are actually from a Vital pack which I've recently released. So if you do want the sounds that I'm going to be showcasing, they're available on my store. There's a link in the description. Without blabbering too much, let's look at my 5 tips for maximizing your macros. Let's dive in and have a look. So tip number 1, let's call this the super filter. I want to show you a quick example of the sound. So what's happening here in this sound? Often when I'm making FM leads, I like to use a bandpass filter. But the problem with that is that at the 0% sweep of the bandpass filter, you're kind of getting a very low frequency sound. You're not getting the full FM tone. So often when I'm creating these kinds of patches, I'll have like 2 loaded up in the project. One that's just kind of raw for those kind of gated sounds, and then one with filters on and all sorts of different filters on. So one really cool thing that you can set up in Vital is being able to create a bypass. So when your macro is at 0%, it actually mixes the filter out. And as you turn up the filter a little bit more, it kind of quickly sweeps in the mix of the filter and then applies that bandpass filter sweep. So let me show you how to set this up real quick. In Vital, let's add a filter over here. And like I said, when we add a bandpass, I like the sound of a bandpass filter, specifically with Psytrance. It sounds really good. It's like a very staple sound in Psytrance. Okay, so we've dialed in a nice range for the macro. But now when we leave it static with the macro not turned, it's almost like there's kind of no sound. It's just like low, it's just that low frequency, which is obviously going to clash with the bass and stuff. So here, what I want to show you how to set up is the on-off bypass switch. So let's just set this mix down to 0 real quick. And you'll see now it's the full frequency sound. But we want to be able to actually turn it on as we sweep this up. So let's set this macro to control the mix as well. At the moment, it's kind of not doing as drastic a switch on the mix. So over here, we can go over to the matrix, and the magic of today's video is all in the mod remaps. So over here, we can just add a shape that's like this to this filter. So what's going to happen is, as we kind of dial it up to this point, it's going to mix that filter 100%, and then it's going to begin the sweep. Check this out. So often what happens because of this, there is a bit of a volume spike because the filtered sound has less frequency, so it's going to be, higher in volume. So you can adjust for that using this macro over here and just set it to the level. And then we'll do a similar thing with, like we did with the filter mix on the mod remap for it. So that, when it sweeps that filter in, it turns the level up on the oscillator. And what we can do then is just turn the level down to compensate. Okay, so tip number 2, let's call this the super duper filter. So how this works is it's a similar concept to the first one, except when the macro is at 0%, the filter is being sequenced. And then as we turn that filter up, the sequence gets bypassed, and we can then create our own movement in that filter sound. Check this out. So like I said, this particular preset is in the Vital pack, which I've just released, Psytrance Essentials Volume 3. Link is in the description. let's have a look at how to set that sound up. I'm going to initialize this preset real quick. For this particular sound, I'm going to use a phaser filter because I like the sound of this. It's very apparent when we sweep it on a saw wave. So to get this set up, what I want to do is I want to create a sequence using this LFO to sequence the movement of this filter. So here I'm going to draw in steps, hold control, and then let's just do a bunch of steps like this. Any pattern will do here. Okay, so now how do we create this super duper filter, as we're going to call it today? Let's use this macro to modulate the side chain of the sequence that's applied to this filter by dragging it and dropping it onto the inner circle of that modulation circle over here. So there's another way to do it by actually dropping it on the matrix over here, but it's a little bit easier to just drop it on that inner circle. And you see here we've now got this little green dot. And that means that this modulation is now being applied as we turn this up. As we turn that up, it now turns the sequencing on, which is kind of backwards. It's not exactly what we want. However, in the mod remaps, we can invert it by just putting in a shape like this. Now it's inverted, so as we turn this up, it turns that sequence down. Check this out. However, again, that curve is, it's not steep enough. We want it to be something like this, where just this first line, we want to quickly sweep down so that the sequence is quickly bypassed. And then this macro is going to then be applied to the filter so that we can create our own custom sweeps using this macro. Check this out. Okay, so tip number 3, let's call this the super transition. So what this is a macro that controls a bunch of different effects parameters in a single parameter. And what this allows you to do is either turn off all of your reverbs and delays and stuff like that, so that you can kind of render the sound out and chop little bits if you want to. But it's also a nice way of creating transitions into a different part of the track. So this is a sequence that I've created. Okay, so with this one, I'm not going to go through creating the entire patch from scratch just because there's a lot of stuff going on, but I'm going to explain the basics behind how to get it going. So what's essentially going on here is this sound effects macro is controlling the delay, the reverb, and then it's also controlling this EQ lows. So as you turn this up, it kind of sweeps a filter after the delay and reverb, and that's what kind of creates that airiness. But then on top of that, there's a compressor after the entire chain. And then what's happening is it's kind of like compressing that signal so that you're getting more of the effects and less of the original sound. So it's kind of mixing that in, and each of them has a slightly different curve, which I've kind of created with the mod remaps over here. As you can see here with the effects, that the low cutoff only starts sweeping right around the end, whereas the delay, dry wet, and feedback are sweeping the entire duration. So it's about fine-tuning these remaps. You see here where the compressor kind of slowly starts fading in at the end here. It's about fine-tuning all of these so that you're getting that really, really perfect sweep. But at the same time, you want it so that when you set it to 0, all of the reverbs and delays and stuff are set off so that you can render it out and chop it if you need to. Okay, so the next one I call the super fader. So what this is the ability to fade between 4 different sources. So you could use this for volume or for modulations. I think it's most interesting in modulations. So how I've mainly used it in the presets in this pack is to change the different movements that's happening on the filter. So this movement knob, wherever you see this is a similar thing that's being applied, wherever you see this movement macro. So what's happening is at 0, there's no modulation happening on the filter parameter over here. And as you sweep this up, this kind of sweeps up to this point here, at which the filter has a particular LFO movement. But then as we sweep from here to here, it changes to this movement. So it goes LFO 5, LFO 6, then it goes into this movement over here. Okay, I'm gonna explain to you how to set up something very similar, not this exact same thing, because the sweeps do take some time to fine tune. This particular one is easier in the mod matrix rather than dropping it onto the little circle, because there's quite a few different modulations which we'll be applying here. Use macro 2 for this, just to keep things a little bit more concise, because this is sweeping our filter. So macro 2, let's choose, let's call this movement, and let's call this filter. So let's set this to modulate this amount, macro 1 over here. Okay, so with this one, let's say we're going to set up 4 different LFOs, and we want to switch between those, or 3 different LFOs, and we want to switch between 4 different parameters. So it's going to be no movement, LFO 1, LFO 2, LFO 3. Okay, so how we do this is mod remaps. On this one, we want to set it so that nothing happens in the first thing. In the second, the third and the fourth, we can actually divide this by 4 just to make things a little bit easier. So nothing, 1, boom, boom. So now what happens is as we turn this, when it gets into the second quadrant, it actually enables that modulation. Okay, so then let's set up another LFO over here. Let's set this to modulate this over here. Let's go to the matrix. Let's turn down the modulation amount. Then let's set this macro to modulate that modulation amount. So then in macro 2 over here, in the second one, we want to go like this, up on the third one, and then down. In actual fact, here, in all of them, we must just go in and make sure that this last point is down. Otherwise, it's going to make some nonsense for us. So then let's go into LFO 3, and then let's create another one over here. Go into the mod remaps, etc. Do this. Make sure that the last one is up like this. Here we can set up a weird shape like this, and then let's check if this is working. Okay, so tip number 5 is what I call the state jumper. So I have mentioned this a few times, and it's actually, this particular preset is actually from my volume 2 preset pack from Vital. But the idea here is to set up a bunch of effects modulations that are in a single macro, and then to create all sorts of wild mod remaps on those. And in this particular example, it's really good to then random the macro every time the note is triggered, because then that creates like all sorts of, you know, random stuff each note. And it can sometimes create really magical results like this. Okay, so let's just start with a source sound. So for this, let's just see. I'm going to start with a saw wave. But we're going to go in here and we're going to actually change this a little bit later to make it a little bit more interesting. So what I want to do is literally enable all of the effects. But let's just go one by one. I might just speed this up because it might take a little bit of time. But the idea is to enable the effect, then create, and then kind of set it up how you prefer it. So with this chorus, I like to turn this down, for example. Yeah, it already sounds better. And then what we want to do is we want to macro control each of the parameters in that thing, and then go into the mod remaps of each one and create all sorts of different things for each one. So just keep in mind that we are limited here to the amount of macros, modulations that we can apply to a single macro. But there's ways around that, which I'm going to explain to you shortly. So here, for example, we've got this range of depth. Let's just set this all the way. So we've got the entire range of movement. Do you guys see what I'm saying? So let's turn the feedback up and set that all the way. Turn the mix down and all the way. So that we've got these kind of variations which we can apply here. So these kinds of things, time-based effects, I like to have last in the chain. Choruses, flanges, phases will generally go last in the chain, and delays and reverbs and that kind of thing. So again, let's enable one of these, and then let's just go wild with the parameters here. Okay, so here's where the weirdness begins. Let's go into the matrix for now. We're still going to carry on a little bit with more of the effects. So for each of these, let's just say that we want to make 16 different states. So it's going to switch between 16 different states of these parameters each time this macro is kind of selected. So the trick here, I guess, is to try get it so that like no two of these are the same. You can have some which are like, for example, you can leave the sweep in just to create all sorts of weirdness. The idea here, I guess, is so that at no 2 points do you have two of the same FX setups. Does that make sense? So this, again, this does take some time, and often the results aren't so great, but you can create a preset that is kind of randomly inspiring at all sorts of different in different contexts. So this work is not for nothing. You know what I mean? You can always go in and create all sorts of weird presets. Remember the mod remaps, delete this last point, or make it like so that it sweeps to that point. Otherwise, when you sweep this to the very top, it's going to create weirdness. Okay, so do you guys get where I'm going with this? You guys get where I'm going with this. So I'm going to set a random onto this macro. I'm going to turn the speed or the frequency down to freeze. So now and set it to sample and hold. So now we've got two note on randoms. One that's controlling the wavetable position and the other one that's controlling this macro itself. So now every time we trigger a note, it's automatically turning all of those FX parameters to something different. Check this out. Okay, so here's where I'm going to fast forward a little bit and just kind of expand this to all of the parameters here. Okay, so in this example, I didn't run out of modulation slots, but if we did, you could potentially set up your LFOs to work the same as a mod remap by just freezing it and then setting the macro to modulate its phase position and then setting that LFO to then modulate various other parameters and then mod remapping each of those modulations. So I'm just going to make a quick example here. We can add spectral time skew. And then let's modulate that. And then we can add, for example, like let's say bend over here. And then we can modulate that as well. And then jump into here. And you see we've got another 2 modulation slots and it hasn't filled up that original one over here. So we can just keep stacking it and stacking it and stacking it. Just create, I think, 128 modulation slots on a single random. So that means 1 random, 128, 5 randoms. You could have 600 and something different randoms going in Vital, which is pretty insane compared to the CPU usage that would probably create in any other type of software. Okay, so that last preset I will actually upload to my Patreon just because it's a little bit more complex than the ones that are in the preset pack, and I guess it's kind of usable, kind of not. It's so randomized that you might get something good out of it, hopefully. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. As usual, if you haven't yet, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel to see more videos like this. And again, if you forgot or if you missed the part where I mentioned a few times, a lot of the sounds that I previewed in this video are from the last Vital pack, which I've just released. That's on my online store. You can check the link for descriptions. Anyway, see you guys next time. Cheers.